Introduction to Federal Records Management Training, sponsored by the Greater Kansas City Federal Executive Board. My name is Catherine Cole, a training specialist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Center for Animal Welfare in Kansas City, Missouri. This is a two-day training, and your confirmation link should allow you to not only log in today, but also for tomorrow's session. During the presentation, please feel free to submit your questions using your question box or raise your hand to ask your question live. You'll notice that you have a control panel with an orange box and a white arrow. By clicking that arrow, you can collapse or expand your control panel. Just underneath that arrow, you'll see a figure of a hand. If you would like to ask your question live, please click the hand. That allows us to know that you are raising your hand, and as time permits, we will announce your call and feel free to ask your questions. You may also send your questions throughout the presentation via the question box. By expanding your panel, on the right-hand side, you'll see a box that says questions. Feel free to send any questions regarding the presentation or if you need technical assistance. This presentation is being recorded, and you will be notified when the recording is available. Your presenter for both sessions is Keith Holden. Keith is the Records Officer for United States Department of Agriculture Farm Services Administration and USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. As the Records Officer, Keith has full responsibility for providing administrative and technical guidance to offices across the country on all issues related to records management. Keith provides technical advice and guidance to all levels of management on records management to include use of documents, retention periods, and disposal schedules. Keith performs comprehensive evaluations and analysis of records and e-records management programs for all Farm Services Administration and Foreign Agricultural Services offices. Keith also works closely with USDA Departmental Records Officer, Office of General Counsel, and the National Archives and Records Administration on sensitive and special records related issues to include litigation holds. I'll now turn it over to our presenter, Keith Holden.
Good morning, and thank you, Catherine, for the nice introduction. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. As you heard from my bio, records management is my passion, and I've been working in this field for many years in both private industry and government. Over the next 2 days, I will provide you with an overview of records management to include definitions and government-wide policy. I have also included a few poll questions each day to help test your learning. I realize that we have a mixed audience, but I have included throughout this presentation some best practices that USDA have implemented within the Farm Service Agency. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Okay, again, welcome to the Introduction of Federal Records Management Training. Our course objective this morning and tomorrow is during this training, you will learn records management terminology, records authorities and responsibilities, how to set up and maintain files, record schedules, archives, records and information system, which is called ARCIS. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about ERA, the Electronic Records Archiving System, talk a little bit about archiving records, and differentiate a record and a non-record. Our course objective. Today, we will go through 5 modules. Under Module 1, we'll talk a little bit about records management terminology. Module 2, we'll talk a bit about what is a record. Module 3, we'll talk records, authorities and responsibilities. Module 4, we'll talk about the records life cycle. And Module 5, we will talk a bit about record schedules. And then we'll have a question and answer session. But again, throughout the course of the training, feel free to ask questions as we go along.
Keith, this is Catherine. It looks like there's some slide advancement delay. Would you mind moving your cursor over a little bit? And let's see if we can correct that before we get going too far. Yes, if you could put it in the middle of the screen, and I think we should be good to go.
Okay.
Is it advancing for you?
No, not yet.
Okay. If you could try your page down if enter is not working.
Okay, under Module 1, records management terminologies. The first item is active records. These are records that's needed to conduct business in your office or in other parts of the program. These are records that's maintained on site, and they're needed, whenever, an issue comes up where you can actively reach out and get those records without any request from NARA to, retrieve these records back. So they're always they're available to you, and they're retrievable upon request. Archives. When we talk about archives, we talk about preservation. We talk a little bit about sufficient historical value that warrants continued preservation of records. We talk about when you archive records to the National Archives and Records Administration, what happens to agencies is that they lose custody when those records are transferred over into the custody of NARA. In cases such as this, what happens then is you have to do a research request because we've lost the custody, and these records are the custody of the National Archives. So it states that the non-current records an organization preserved because of their continuing and enduring value. It states that the National Archives of the United States means those records that have been determined by the archivists of the United States to have sufficient and historical value. The next item is cutoff. When we talk about cutoff, we're thinking of two different perspectives. We're thinking of physical year, and we're thinking of the calendar year. And it says ending files at regular intervals, whether it's the end of the physical year, which is September 30th, or the end of the calendar year, which is December at the end of that year. And it says usually at the close of the physical or calendar year to permit their disposition or transfer. When we cut records off in those intervals, records they're either sent to the Federal Records Center. In some cases, they may still remain active, and we may maintain them in the office when we no longer need them to conduct agency business. But again, there's dispositions, after a record is cut off. It tells you exactly what needs to be done. Sometimes from a legal perspective, we may maintain them on site. But then, if we don't have no use for them, then we can cut them off. And, if the disposition says send them to storage, we can send them to temporary storage. Disposition is the third stage of the life cycle. And this action is taken when there's no need, you no longer need these records to conduct agency business. This action also includes transfer to agency storage facilities or federal record centers, or transfer from one agency to another. It all depends on what your use is for the life cycle, the third stage of that life cycle, when you no longer need them for agency business. The Federal Record Center is where we store all temporary records. But there's a next step to the Federal Record Center and us storing temporary records, is when, if they have historical value and they become permanent after they're maintained at the temporary level. So it says a record center operated by the National Archives. Now, once they are transferred over into the National Archives again, that's when we no longer have custody of those records. A file maintenance disposition plan is more of a roadmap of where files are located. And it outlines a physical location at which a program files are to be maintained and the specific type of files. And it will also give you a description of those records and the retention period. But most importantly, the physical location of those records in the offices will allow either an assistant, director, senior agency official, whoever works in that program office, a direct connection with where those records are stored in the office, what file cabinet, what room number, what drawer number, the exact location of those files. It makes it convenient to go to that file maintenance disposition plan to determine where a particular type of record is located. For instance, budget records. Budget records may be in room number 13, cabinet number 1, drawer number 3. So it will give you a physical location, and it's very specific. It's a very useful tool to use, and it's one of the things that we use here at USDA FSA, and it's a very good, useful tool that that allow us to go directly and find what we need, you know, especially in critical periods. Headquarters and field office records liaisons. They're responsible for the oversight of the records program, whether it's either headquarters office or field office, you know, wherever agency or sub offices are located. And they have a clear understanding of the records management initiatives, any new items that come up regarding records management, and they work directly with the agency records officers along with their program officers to provide some, you know, more insight about either new initiatives and anything that comes up with records management, any new policy, any new authorities and regulations. The general record schedule is a schedule that governs the disposition of specific records that's common to most offices. The general record schedule is a schedule that the National Archives and Records Administration provide to all federal agencies throughout the United States. Those schedules are written, the retention periods are provided by the National Archives. There are cases where, you know, either like new schedules are being provided now, or the formatting and more, they're coming up with more of a big bucket approach for the general record schedules. What the National Archives do is they send draft schedules out to federal agencies and request their input regarding, the draft schedules. They want every federal agency to have some type of input regarding retention, regarding description, how those schedules are written. So it's really giving all the agencies the opportunity to weigh in on, what's being done by the lead agency, which is the National Archives and Records Administration, before anything is approved in terms of general record schedules and disseminated to the federal agencies. Inactive records. It's when records are no longer required to conduct agency business. They become inactive. Now, we have to also look at a record becoming inactive. We no longer need it on a day-to-day basis to conduct agency business, but we also have to be conscious of, the legal aspect of inactive records. Do we need it for litigation purposes? Has litigations come up where, we still need to maintain these inactive records in our office? So when we no longer need them, there's still a possibility down the road where we might. Even if they become inactive and there's a disposition, and the disposition says we can destroy those records in 3 years. If there's ongoing litigation, we still have to maintain those inactive records if we have them in the office, or if they're stored at the Federal Record Center, we still have to maintain them there. The life cycle of records is a very, very important key to records management. It's something that we do every day. We create information, and out of creating that information, there are some records. Despite the fact that we only create a certain percentage of official records, we still create an abundance of information. And again, one of the first stages is the creation of records. And then there's the maintenance and use of records. Once they're created, what do we do with those records? How do we label folders? How are those records maintained? Do we have a file maintenance and disposition for those records? What do we do after when that disposition, which is the third stage of that life cycle, tell us, after 3 years, those records need to be destroyed, or after 3 years, we need to send them to the Federal Record Center, maintain them there for 10 years, and offer them to NARA after they're 10 years or 15 years old. The disposition is very, very key, again, because of legal issues. If litigations, are active or come up in your office, and we have those records and they're still maintained, we cannot destroy them. We shouldn't transfer them over into the custody of NARA. We have to maintain them for legal reasons. Permanent records. As I've said twice, permanent records are records that have sufficient historical and other value to warrant continued preservation by the federal government. So permanent records, we may send them to the Federal Record Center, but there's something that we have to do at some point after a certain period of time with these records, and that is to transfer them to the custody of the National Archives and Records Administration. But we won't just transfer them without the approval of an agency. And again, we talked about, creating information, but there's only 3 to 7% of all federal records are permanent. Pretty much everything else is temporary in nature. Records management. It's defined as planning. When you plan an organization, we have to think records management. How do we control those records? How do you control the growth of those records? The direction that the organization is going in terms of records, how much we keep, where those records going to be stored, how we maintain them. How do we organize, those records to make it more available, and what records need to be available to parts of the organization. Making sure that training's conducted. Training is a key to records management and how we maintain records. Also promoting, outreach. We need to promote records management organizations. When we promote our organizations, we have to promote the records side of it. And it states other managerial activities that relate to the three phases of the life cycle: the creation, the maintenance and use, and the disposition of records. It says to achieve adequate documentation of federal policies and transactions. Record schedules. Record schedules, the general record schedules are created again and approved by the National Archives. There's also another record schedule that's created, and that's a program record schedule. And they're specific to your program, but they are created by the agency, and they're approved by the National Archives. So it says it's document providing authority to the final disposition. Every record schedule has a disposition. And it says of recurring or non-recurring records. Recurring records, budget records, travel records, TNA records, things of that nature. When you talk about recurring, non-recurring record could be specific to a particular program. But there's different verbiage when you talk about record schedule. And it says they're also called records disposition schedules, record control schedules, records retention schedules, or just schedules. But keep in mind, when you talk record schedules, there's two. There's general record schedules and there's a program record schedules. The record series. Record series has to do with more of a filing unit or document that's arranged, like TNA records. They may be all in one series, like travel records or budget records. But it states that they are kept together because they relate to a particular subject or function. And it says results from the same activity. That's why I said TNA records. They all relate to the same function. Travel records or budget records. So anytime you create those type of records, you can put them in the series together. But please keep in mind, we talked about the fiscal year and we talk about calendar year. Sometimes throughout the case of a year or 2 years, we may have to remove some budget records, and we may have to create new folders and integrate those new folders into those groupings. Temporary records. Temporary records, again, I talked about, temporary and permanent records. It says records approved by the National Archives as approved for disposal, namely destruction or donation. Temporary records, we have to do something with them. There's something at the end of the life cycle that causes us to do something with them. At some point, we're going to dispose of them. Or if the agency is approved to donate those records, we will donate them to a cause, another agency, or for research or whatever. but it says either immediately or after a specific time. It has to be after the disposition of those records. And it says major federal records are temporary. That means even if they are kept for 30 years. So we can maintain temporary records for 30 years, sometimes 30 years or more. It all depends on what's attached to that record with its legal proceedings. So we can maintain temporary records for some time, but keep in mind that they're still temporary records. They're not permanent. Let's move to Module 2. What is a record? In December of 2000, November of 2014, there was a bill, which is HR 1233. It was signed by the president, that redefined the definition of a records to include presidential and the Federal Records Act Amendment of 2014. For years, there was a definition that started out any books, papers, maps, and the other documentary material. Well, because it was defined, it sort of changed the definition that sort of made everything more inclusive. So it states under 44 USC 3301, it says the federal records is an information resource. Please keep in mind, in any format, any media. And it says created in the course of business and it's received for action or needed to document agency activities. So down here in the bottom, it says, in general, it says the term records include all recorded information, regardless of form or characteristic, that's made or received by the federal agency under federal law. An important key to this, it says made or received. We not only create records, but we receive records. It could be specific to an agency, or it could be specific to a program. And it says in connection with the transaction, here it is, the transaction of public business and preserved for appropriate preservation by that agency. So down, and there's some other information in here that talks about informational value of data in them. And it says to not include library. It does not. It's non-record material. That wasn't included in the definition of a record for years, but they put it in here when the president redefined the definition of a record. It says does not include library or museum material made or acquired and preserved solely for reference or exhibition purposes. Down at the bottom it says, for purposes of the paragraph, the term records, recorded information, includes all traditional forms of records, regardless of physical or form or characteristics, including information received. Now, I think this is very important to all federal agencies. And when you're in doubt, you can take and make a copy of this. Have employees make copies of this and keep it at their desk. If they ever have, or if they ever question a document, they can go to this 44 USC, either at the National Archives and Records Administration website, or if they create a copy of this and keep it at their desk, for a quick review, if there's a question. I think this is very, very important information. The definition of it, the way it was redefined, I think it says all recorded information, which it made it even more important because that for years there was a lot of doubt about exactly what was a record. So please keep in mind, any employees, any agencies, you can always use this as a tool, a very useful tool, when there's a question regarding what is a record. Okay, I think after this slide, we have a poll question. Okay, the poll question, it says, which of these are records? A, it's paper documents. B, files on a shared drive. C, files on a flash drive. Or D, all of the above. Please select which item that you think is a record or are records.
And Keith, while people are making their selection, I just want to address a couple of questions regarding the recording and the presentation slides. We will be using your registration email to correspond with you when the recording and any additional information related to this presentation are available. Still working on a place to host that. And I have another question, Keith, and I think you might be getting into it further into the presentation, so I'll defer to you if you want to answer it now or later. But we did have a question regarding transferring of electronic records to NARA and how do you archive electronic records?
Well, there's two answers to this. Being able to archive electronic records, if you have an electronic record system, it makes it a lot easier to be able to archive that information to NARA electronically from one system to another, but it's in coordination with NARA. The other answer is, if you don't have an electronic record system, I always teach that if it's received electronically and created electronically, maintained it electronically, we can use a disk or CD to transfer information to the National Archives still in that electronic format. Any other questions?
Let's see. If a record has a 3-year retention, at what point is it designated active and at what point is it designated inactive? In other words, when does the clock start for an active status and when does the clock start for an inactive status?
At the end of that retention period, the records are classified as inactive unless those records are still being used in that office for a specific project, or records are being used because of litigation purposes. They become inactive, but the records are still usable. So we still follow the disposition. If, it says destroy when 3 years old, but if there's a use for them, we still have to maintain them. But because we're not using them on a daily basis, they're considered inactive, but we still have a reason to maintain them in the office. There may be an active role for those records where we cannot destroy them at the particular disposition of them. But then when we have no other need for them, it may be we may have to maintain them for 2 more years because of whatever's going on. It could be a reorganization. It could be further litigation. So the disposition period sort of, it's put on hold because of our still continued use for those records. But after that, after our use is over and we have no further use for them, then we can apply the disposition. And we don't have to keep them for 3 more years, they can be destroyed if approved by, director, agency official, or that determines that we no longer have no use and they're past the disposition period.
Thank you. And we've got our poll results up.
The poll results, it's an overwhelming 100% all of the above. So it tells me that, everybody out there that knows a little bit about records. Can you take it back? Can you put it back up there for a second, Catherine?
Back, actually, no, once we've closed it out, are you
okay.
talking about the selections? It was paper documents, files on your S drive, flash drive.
Okay, well, anyway, I'll elaborate on it a little bit. So paper documents, again, we talked about 3 to 7% of records that's created, in all of agencies. There's a very, very small amount, but we also can say that, we maintain information, and sometimes that information has to be shared within an organization, so we have to find somewhere to put that information, and sometimes it's official records that they're put on shared drives for other folks to see, review, use to their discretion. And sometimes that files that are put on a flash drive, if someone leaves the agency and they're transferring information, we can use disk, CD-ROM, flash drives for those records. So all 3 of these items that will hold, especially the A and B, will hold records, and then the actual paper documents that are created, some of those are official records. So thanks. I appreciate the answer, and I appreciate the participation. Okay. It says it's a record when the information is created, and again, I said when information is created or received by your agency under federal law. Please keep in mind there's a lot of information out there that pops up on your computer. It says government something, but it's really not the federal government. So we always have to be mindful, but it says information that's created or received by your agency under federal law. And it says also it contains evidence of your agency, organization, or activities, or because of the value that information contains. So we have to be mindful of, what is in a document, what is being created, how valuable that information is. Is there historic information there? Is there continued information in those documents that we have to maintain over a period of time? Module 3, let's talk a little bit about records authorities and responsibilities. We'll talk about the Department regulations, authorities, and responsibilities, the Department and Agency Records Officer, Records Management Specialist, the Records Liaison, which we discussed a bit prior, and teamwork. I want to share with you just a little bit of our Department of Regulations, but any Department of Regulations that we have, it's approved by the National Archives. That's where we get all of our information from. And here it talks about litigation retention policy for documentary material, including ESI. When it says both records and non-record documentary material in paper or electronic format frequently become the subject of litigation. I think you've probably heard me talk about litigation maybe 10 times already, because to me, that's a very, very important key to being able to establishing a vital, and not vital records, but a vital comprehensive records management program for an agency or for a department. It says employees create and maintain an increasing portion of business information using computers. When we talk about the litigation retention policy, when we talk about including electronically stored information, how do we store it? How do we maintain it after it's created or after we receive it? It says ESI must be managed alongside traditional paper records. How do we do that? Paper records, we still have a policy, here at our agency, a print to file, but we're moving into a totally new arena from just print and file documents anymore. And what I'm getting at is, if we don't have a records management application, creating electronic folders, name folders, setting up folders, dragging and dropping, maintaining them, those records electronically. It says it must be managed alongside traditional paper records to ensure compliance with federal laws and records management regulations. I know a lot of agencies have created a lot of paper over the years, but we're totally moving in a different direction. We're having to maintain all emails electronically. We're going to have to maintain permanent records electronically. We're going to have to be able to store that information in the electronic format to transfer to the National Archives and Records Administration. It says not while all paper or ESI or agency records, they may nevertheless be relevant subject to discovery. When there's a litigation come about and there's discovery, we have to find those records. We have to find that information. And if we created name folders, shared drive, SharePoint sites, and maintain it in the electronic format, it makes it a lot easier to locate it. It says unmanaged and unidentified ESI resides on our computers, that they poses a threat to the department's ability to document and reconstruct business and making decisions. So this is just some of our policy, but if you go to the National Archives website, we'll see some of the same information. Also, under records authorities and responsibilities, there's another, the DM 3080 for our agency. You see, it still talks about the U.S. Code and the chapters, chapter 21, 29, and 31, and 33. It says the regulations set out and summarize the policies, responsibilities, and procedures for the creation, maintenance, and use and disposition of all records. Same information that NARA provides, same policy that NARA provides. We have to make it suitable for our agency. Still talks about the definition of a record. It encompasses documents in all media, regardless of physical form. And it also says it includes records that's made or received by the agency under the United States government under federal law or in connection with the transaction of public business. Here's another one of our regulations, 3099. And it talks about records management policy for departing employees. if you look at under 44 USC 3105, it talks about safeguarding records. And under 3106, it talks about the unlawful removal and destruction of records. It says this regulation for all federal employees, regardless of type of appointment, in addition to high-level officials or appointees, may be required to account for records that could not be classified as documentary and or presidential records. We have to account for them. We have to make sure that safeguards are in place for those records. We have to make sure that there's no unlawful removal or destruction of those records. It says it is a policy within 90 days of employment, all employees, including senior officials and political appointees, must be briefed regarding the type of records they will be required to protect. That's that onboarding process. Every employee from senior agency officials down should be briefed about the records management requirement, what agencies' expectations are with regards to new employees coming on and handling records that belong to that agency. It says prior to leaving employment and reporting to a new duty station, all departing employees must follow a clearance process, an exit clearance process. This is just a form that we use, 11062, which was a form that was created upon my arrival here. We had 1106. That 1106 had just a whole lot of standard stop gaps where we go to budget, we go to procurement, we go to travel, and we get signed a form checked and signed off on. And then there was a item there that says records management. And I said, what am I signing off on this form? I don't understand. And, someone said, well, for records, but what records? So that caused me to create another form, which was the 11062, the records management exit clearance form. It's for all records. It's for all electronic information. And it allows an employee and the supervisor and the records officer of the agency to be the only people that review and sign off on the transfer of records or assignments or, any electronic records before a person leaves that agency, to make sure that the safety of those records were guarded, and we provided additional steps for the transfer over to another supervisor. And that way I knew that I knew that I was okay with signing off on something before an employee departed the agency. The agency records officer. I serve as a senior analyst on all records management matters. I'm responsible for the policy and technical program administration of electronic records program functions. I coordinate with the National Archives of the Department's records officer and the Office of General Counsel on records management issues. The records management staff assists any employees at headquarters and field offices in providing the records management support and assistance. This is just a notice that was created. I think it was revised when I came about, and it was the appointment of a records liaison. And I think it's very important to have a records liaisons in your programs to have a clear understanding of records management, their concerns, And it states that their responsibilities include assisting in maintaining, servicing, and disposing of office records. It says the liaison must learn the program functional areas and the mission, and that the records support and know the purpose that the records serve. They also maintain the file maintenance and disposition plan for that office, assisting records custodians in setting up the file maintenance and disposition plan, that roadmap to where records are. And they also should account for active and inactive records for an agency and programs. They also are to ensure that eligible records are promptly prepared to retire or transfer to storage. They must be proficient on equipment used for storing or retrieving records, and they should be aware of any file rooms and use checkout cards when case files are checked out, whether it's EEO case files, real property lease files, travel files, things of that nature. So at least someone could look at those checkout cards and say, okay, this file was checked out by, John, and on this date. But I think one of the important parts to this is making sure that those files are returned back to those locations when they're no longer needed throughout the course of a workday. It says they also should know and implement records maintenance, and use and disposition policies and procedures for maintaining records. They should adjust office records maintenance practices to provide accurate and efficient record services to the users of records, and consultation with the records officer is key when there's problems that affects creation, the maintenance, and using and disposal of those records. Teamwork. In every department, every agency should work together. The agency records officer provides training, technical assistance, and standard guidelines. It's more economical and efficient records management that protects the agency. We have to think of the legal liabilities when we're protecting agency information, agency records. And it says the agency records officer partners with many organizations of the agency, to include you, to include NARA, to include, again, when I say you, it's various agencies and various departments. I've worked with quite a few agencies on records management issues, providing some guidance, questions about records management, training. But I think some of the key components of who we assist is OIG, Department of Justice, on a lot of legal issues, the Office of Management and Budget, and the General Services Administration. Here are the agency records management responsibilities. It says every federal agency is legally required to manage its records, and they are evidence of the agency's actions and therefore must be managed properly. Down here at the next bullet, it says agency heads have specific legal requirements for records management, which include under 44 U.S.C. 3101, making and preserving records that contain adequate, proper, documentation of the organization, such as policies, decisions, functions, procedures, and transactions. Under 44 USC, it talks about establishing and maintaining an active continual program for economical and efficient management of the records of the agency. I talked about establishing safeguards, which is a very, very important aspect to records management under 44 USC 3105 against the removal or loss of records and making it a penalty for people that knowingly move records without approval. Under 3106, it talks about notifying the archivists of the United States for any impeding or threatening unlawful destruction. When we talk about destruction of records, it could be natural causes that cause, the loss of records or the destruction of records. One of the requirements for federal agencies is to notify NARA, especially when they're permanent records. Because if they're permanent records, eventually those records will be sent for preservation. So NARA, they want to know, can those records be created if there's destruction? Can we create those records so when it's time for those records to be transferred for historical preservation, that they will be allowed to? If not, NARA wants to know why. What have we put in place to prevent this from happening again in the future? So it's a whole series of questions that they ask when we talk about the unlawful destruction of records that are permanent, and they're key to documenting history, documenting the agency, documenting the functions of the agency. Okay, here's a poll question.
And Keith,
Number
while we
2.
get that poll ready, we did have a question about instant messaging and the use of instant messaging, like through Communicator or Skype. Is that type of communication considered an official record? And are those who are managing the Skype system maintaining those conversations?
Well, I'm not sure if we don't maintain them. If it's maintained, it's through, Office of Communication. They may have their way of maintaining those records, and there should be some type of recording, some type of solution that they have. We talked about different medias, instant messaging and things of that nature, and we have talked with the department about coming up with a different schedule for that, and as an agency, I don't think we're totally where we need to be with it, but Office of Communication are the ones that, if you have instant messaging, internet, things that's put on the intranet, they're the ones that would be able to have the ability to either be able to record, because if you look at from the agency or from the department level, any phone calls, any messaging, any other media that the secretaries use, that information is recorded. So from an agency level, I don't handle that, but there should be some avenues for being able to maintain and capture that information in the electronic format.
Thank you.
Because at certain levels, that information is permanent.
Thank you. And we've launched the poll, so please
Okay.
indicate your response.
Poll 2, what are your records management responsibilities? Is it create and manage records to document official activities? destroy records when you leave government service, or file personal papers with the agency records. Please select A, B, or C.
Just to remind everyone, you can make the selection on your screen and then click Submit. Okay, Keith, it looks like we have the majority of our audience voting.
Okay. There's an overwhelming 92% that says, what is your records management responsibilities? Create and manage records to document official activities. And that's what we do. Anytime we use a computer, create a document, receive a document from an outside agency, other agencies, other programs, we have to manage that information to document the activities of the agency. And that is the answer. We create very little records, but we have to manage records, and we manage other information. But when we talk about the records management responsibilities, we want to make sure that we manage those official or document official activities of the agency. Okay, Catherine.
We're trying to close the poll now. Keith will probably go to this other poll and then close it, and then try to close these out.
Okay.
We apologize. Looks like we're having an issue closing out our polls. Keith, we're going to close our part, but you should still be able to continue going.
Okay. So I should wait till you close this, correct? Okay. 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 Program requirements. It talks about federal agencies are required to establish and maintain an effective and efficient record-keeping system and follow the record-keeping requirements. And when we talk about record-keeping requirements, we should always reflect back to, 44 USC 3101, by making and preserving records that contain adequate and proper documentation. But trying to make it move.
So we lost your audio there, Keith.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me clearly, Catherine?
I can.
Okay. Under the record-keeping requirements, it says records that conduct government business that are complete and accurate to the extent required to document the organization. Again, you've seen this throughout the course of these slides, maybe once or twice. It talks about the organizations, the functions, the policies, the decisions, any procedures, and the essential transaction of the agency that is designed to furnish information necessary to protect, again, the legal and financial rights of the government. We're all agencies are held accountable through scrutiny by Congress and oversight agencies such as GAO, OMB, NARA, and GSA, as well as agency auditors and in the Inspector General's office. In addition to previous requirements, there are other reasons to have a records management program: to obtain necessary information easily. We talk about the file maintenance and disposition plan, be able to obtain that information when needed. To ensure timely access to information, makes it convenient. To control the growth or the creation and growth of records. It allows us to use the disposition when we're supposed to do something with those records that we no longer have a need for, to send those records to storage. Or if it's time to destroy those records, to destroy them. It improves efficiency and productivity. You're able to retrieve records in a timely manner. And it ensures regulatory compliance. It makes sure that we are complying with the agency that governs all of records management, which is the National Archives and Records Administration. As well as it minimizes litigation costs. And to have a good records management program, it safeguards vital information. I talked about internal controls. I talk about making sure that, if records belong in a certain place, there's case files. If there's different program files that belongs in a certain place, they're there, and we have the proper controls in place. Locked doors, locked cabinets, locked buildings. And it supports the management decision-making. And it also preserves the memory of an office. Module 4, we'll talk a little bit about the records life cycle and labeling folders. Again, the three phases of the life cycle is records creation, records maintenance and use, and records disposition. The first stage is when I talked about records that are made or received by your agency. It goes, just because you received them, it doesn't mean you created them, but they're in your office. But then there's records that you made. Those are ones that you created in your office. It's still, the ones that you receive are still a part of that creation. It identifies the need for information through any new legislation. Any new legislation coming from NARA, any new authorities that's coming in, any new regulations, any or administrative requirement changes to existing programs, new programs, abolished programs. We still have to maintain information about that program. Also, during the first stage, it talks about information created or received through manual or electronic system of records. And things like reports or forms, any new directives that's created, or any other correspondence. That's the inception part, the creation part. The maintenance and use is any action involving the storage of records or the retrieval of records or any records that's kept in your office or by your agency. How we maintain them in our office, how we label them, how we file them away when we no longer need them to conduct agency business on a daily basis. How we store them. The National Archives and Administration have oversight over the federal record centers throughout the United States, about 17 of them. We have adequate conditions to store federal records in the NARA-approved federal facility. It states program officers shall develop the most efficient and effective means of organizing and storing, talking about FRC facilities, and assessing and retrieving program records. They could at some point be vital records. What's vital to your program? A lot of information that we work on some day-to-day basis, reorgs, new programs. Again, what's important to us? What type of records are important? Maintaining an adequate file plan so we can identify where those records are located. Tracking logs of where those records are, control logs. You know, where are those logs? File plans, ideal plan to have for tracking logs. Where people are, where things are, where we are in processes. Record holdings. How many records do we have in our office? The inventories of different programs. You know, a lot of that information is very important and it's vital to us. Most importantly, how we maintain it and how we use it. disposition when we no longer need it for government business. And again, it says these actions include the transfer from one federal agency to another. There's a process involved when transferring records from one federal agency to another. Or transferring of general administrative or permanent records to the National Archives for preservation. Please keep in mind, when we transfer records from one federal agency to another, there's a process that's called using the chain of custody to transfer, to sign off on. And when records reach that other location, it's signed off on there. So both agencies have a copy, but providing an inventory for records that's going from one agency to another. Anytime we send records to administrative or permanent records to the National Archives, we definitely have an inventory as well with signatures. And again, this is when records are no longer needed to carry out daily businesses. Also, when we transfer those records, we have to follow the cutoff instructions. Disposition information is stated on the approved record schedule or control schedule or the general record schedule. Ways to improve records management. We should ensure that employees are responsible for proper record keeping and put that responsibility in their performance standards. It really helps employees, it motivates them to know that they are part of something that's vital to the operation of an agency when they see that, records management is in their performance standards. It sort of connects them with something. It makes them feel that they're doing something outside of the norm for their agency. It's record keeping. It's knowledge. They're learning. Also, ways to improve is to maintain records needed to document decisions and to designate a record copy of each document and keep it in an official file. There may be duplicate, triplicate copies of something. You designate a record copy for your office. And again, here we go back to the file maintenance and disposition plan. It's very key to an organization or to an agency. More ways to improve is to file reference material separately from official records. Records versus non-records and temporary records versus permanent records. We need to file on a regular basis. Designate a records cleanup day at least once a year. More, if appropriate. Transfer inactive records to the appropriate storage. And know where records are maintained and located in your office, or if they're off-site, have an inventory for those records. If you create a document with a word processor, typewriter, or computer, if you file a document in a file folder, if you answer an inquiry from the public, or respond to a Freedom of Information Act request, if you do anything else that documents your activities on the job, you're a records custodian. And in every agency, I guarantee you there's a high probability that everybody use some type of computer every day. You're responsible for creating records needed to conduct business, recording decisions and actions taken, safeguarding records so that information can be found when needed, disposing of records in accordance with the established record schedule and regulations. Catherine, I think I went 2 slides over past a poll question number 3.
Yes.
Okay.
We can go ahead and launch that now.
Okay. Who are records custodians? Secretaries, A. Program analysts, B. Contractors, C. Or all of the above? Please take your time, look over, select one of the correct answers, and we will compile your votes and we'll discuss briefly.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll.
Okay, who are record custodians? Again, there's an overwhelming 96% that says all of the above. And that's B is correct. Secretaries, remember I said there's a high probability, there's a large amount of everybody in the agency at some point or another work on computers, from the secretary down. Because it says if you created a document with a word processor, typewriter, or computer, file a document in a folder, answer an inquiry from the public, respond to a Freedom of Information Act, or do anything else to document agency activities on the job. So it is all of the above. That secretaries, program analysts, and contractors are records custodians. Again, it talks about creating records needed to conduct agency business and recording decisions and actions taken and safeguarding records so the information can easily be found when needed. That's pretty key right there. Safeguarding that information. I've used that word quite a few times throughout this morning. Safeguarding records so the information can be found when needed. Internal controls. Disposing of records in accordance with the established record schedule. Never dispose of any records that does not have a record schedule, because until the record schedule is created, it still is a record. It's called a permanent record. I think there's we'll talk a little bit about it a few slides over. You are responsible for ensuring the safety of records, the security of records, the availability of records when needed, the timely retrieval of records, the proper retention of records, what to do with those records. Again, if they don't have a retention period, they don't have a schedule. If they don't have a schedule, they're permanent records until we provide a schedule for them. We have to make sure that we have proper retention, make sure those records are transferred to the Federal Records Center when needed. If they're permanent, make sure that they're transferred over into the custody of NARA when needed. Okay, it says, what are the 3 stages of the life cycle? Again, we talk about the creation of records, when records are created or received. We talk a little bit about the maintenance and use, how they're maintained, how they're stored, labels, files, where they're stored in the office, those controls that's in place, it's maintenance and use. And then we talk about the disposition of those records when we no longer need them to conduct agency business. You know, what do we do to them? Where do we send them? Is it time to send them to their resting place? That's either temporary storage until the disposition period is up, or permanent storage, where there's historical value and people will probably do research sometime in our lifetime or other folks' lifetime to study the businesses of your agency or particular program that's in place in an agency for research. Labeling files. It says for easy reference, records should be placed in label folders. It says we use, in our agency, we use straight cut folders, accordion files. I call them expanding wallets, or loose papers, for loose papers, and pressboard folders for records that are frequently used. Pressboard folders, we use them for litigations, you know, things of that nature. It says separate administrative from program records. Always, when you're filing records, your administrative GRS records, and then your program. It says administrative and program files with a retention period of over 1 year will have 2 labels. This is a retention period of a label. It says review annually and destroy superseded or obsolete documents, or destroy a file related to an employee within 1 year after separation or transfer. Personnel records. If you use labels with the retention, it will help you control the growth of records. And this is just a sample of how some labels are set up. We have file codes because we have a file code manual here. And in those file code manuals, you have EEOC records, the start of them, item number 1. But it says up at the top left, it says include the identifiers such as project or an individual's name. It says name, include an additional identifier as necessary. That additional identifier could be a case number. It could be your agency created case number. Include a file creation or open date. What date was that file open? Please keep in mind, you can create a close date. Remember I said any additional identifiers. You can create open January 3rd, 2007, close September 30th, 2007. It could be an open and close date on the left side of that file folder. And it says for records with a retention period of more than 1 year, include disposition instructions from the general record schedule. It's temporary. This is a temporary record. And it says destroy 4 years after resolution of case. This will help control the growth of the records in your office. After this disposition, you will be able to do something with those records. destroy 4 years after resolution of case. When the case is over, 4 years after. It could be an appeal in there, but it still says destroy 4 years after the resolution. If there's an appeal, the record has to be maintained. We keep it in the file. But after 4 years, after that appeal is over, and 4 years after the resolution, then we can destroy those records. Again, it will control the growth of the records in your office. I just wanted to put an example of what we use here at FSA, a file maintenance and disposition plan, which is really a roadmap to where your records are stored. And it's a little distorted, but I still wanted to give you an idea of what I was talking about regarding this plan. Under item number 1, it has a date prepared. Have item number 2A has the name of the liaison. It has the agency, division, or branch. It has to be approved by a supervisor. In item number 4A. In 2B, it has records liaison phone number. It has the program area under 3B. And it has the date the supervisor signed this plan. And under 5, it says, please complete each item as it applies. Under item A, it has a series number, the GRS, and if it was a program, you would have a program code, but what we have now, this is just an old example, is we have file codes, and we can have those file codes for program to go under there. And then in the location, it says room number 304, Bates cabinet. What's in those cabinets are supervisors' personnel files and duplicate OPF documentation. And it gives a brief description of those records. It says maintained by the supervisor to consist of correspondence, forms, and other records related to position, authorization, pending action, position description, request for personnel action, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I wanted to point out to you here is the bold writing on here, and it says subject to Privacy Act. And then it has a filing arrangement. It says arrange alphabetically. This information is Privacy Act information, so there shouldn't be but so many people throughout the office have access to that. A supervisor's assistant. It shouldn't be everybody in the office to have this type of access. More than likely, these records are in the supervisor's office. And then it has under item E, disposition instructions. It says review annually and destroy, supersedes, or obsolete documents. This is a retention period here. But it has another highlighted item under there. It says frozen records. What if there's a records freeze? It tells you that we can't destroy. The records freeze will supersede the disposition instructions. Everything under item number A is in numerical sequence, 118A, 26A, 16.7, 23.7, and then the bottom it says on schedule. That means that these records have no schedule. They can still be put on the file plan because they're permanent. The location, it says 5th floor, room 501, cabinet 3, drawer 3. These are self-assessment of FSA FAS records program. And it has the description with the site assessment questionnaires, engagement letters, etc. But if you look at the item E at the bottom, it says permanent. It says cut off at fiscal year when the supersedes are obsolete, maintain an office of records for a maximum of 5 years after cutoff, retire to the record center, transfer in accordance with 258. That's because these records are not scheduled. When a schedule is written and these records are identified on that schedule, the disposition instructions change. And more than likely, because of the record that's here, they're temporary in nature. So this is just one of the tools that we use for providing a roadmap to where records are located throughout the course of the agency. Module 5, record schedules.
Keith, I think you wanted to launch a poll at this point.
Yes, thank you. A file plan is designed specifically for paper records, true or false.
Okay, the majority of the audience has voted.
Okay. Okay, a file plan is designed specifically for paper records. There's an overwhelming majority selected false, which is 91% of you. And that's the correct answer. The reason being is we still use a shared drive. You know, we may call it S drive, we may call it I drive, we may use a SharePoint site to place our records in. But that does not mean that we still can't have a written file plan to guide employees where those records are located. Just because they're not in an office in a file drawer, that does not mean that we cannot establish a file plan for those records. So that's correct. We can have more than one place to have an established file plan other than for just paper records. Why should we have a record schedule? Because record schedules help us ensure that records are maintained and preserved as long as we need them. NAR regulations require each agency to develop a comprehensive record schedule. If we didn't have that, all these records will be permanent until a schedule is prepared and approved by the Archivist of the United States. NAR also require that federal agencies apply that record schedule to their records. Again, if we don't apply it, we don't control the growth of those records. They're maintained and scattered, and there's no form, there's no roadmap, there's no structure to where those records are in an office. Record schedules provide mandatory instructions that's required by law on what to do with records for current government business. It provides a final resting place for those records, that disposition. It helps preserve those records that are valuable, historical records, historical value. And I talked about research. Maybe after we're all retired, someone wants to do research on a particular agency or a particular department. So they're able to go to the National Archives and look up information about that agency. It helps control the growth, those record schedules. The agencies are responsible for writing their own record schedules that's program related. The agency are also responsible for reviewing existing schedules. You know, some of the questions that we ask is, have your business processes changed within an agency? You know, what do we do? How have our business processes changed? Have any regulations changed within your agency? Have any of our regulations changed? We've had schedules, some very, very old schedules, and I'm sure a lot of federal agencies have, that use that the disposition authority as N1. Now it's different, DAA. You know, that comes from NARA. It doesn't come from us. So the revision of schedules are very key to let the next person know that, okay, these schedules were revised and updated in 2017 or 2016. Some of the other questions are you still creating the same records? Do you need to keep records longer, shorter? Do the retention periods change for our record schedules? And our means the agency, the programs, are records being created electronically? Is there an electronic schedule for them? Inventory your records. We highly recommend that you conduct an inventory to see what records that you have. Again, there are two types of record schedules. There's a general record schedule, which is issued by the National Archives and Records Administration that provides a disposition of temporary administrative records is common to all federal agencies. Then there's a program record schedule that's specific to your program, your function, how your agencies function should be unique to all programs within an agency. Those schedules are written by your agencies. The General Record Schedule is issued by the Archivist of the United States, provide disposal of temporary administrative records. It was legally mandated in 1988, and NARA instruct every federal agency to use the GRS to the greatest extent and use that file maintenance and disposition manual, which will help provide you some structure to your records management program in your office. I just wanted to give you just a view of, because NARA is going through this new evolution of, you know, the new general record schedules and how they look. You know, they're bucketing schedules like financial management records, anything that has to do with financial management budget. They create a series of a lot of different of these schedules, and they put them all into one bucket. So if you go on archives.gov and look at general record schedule, this is what you'll see. But some of the schedules are not yet issued. Say, for instance, under human resources, maybe some issued now. There's some new ones that has come out, but you'll see not yet issued. If they're not yet issued, if you scroll all the way down, it'll show you the old general record schedule. And you will still be able to pick up, you know, budget records, employee management records, procurement records, employee relations records. But this is what the new general record schedule is going to look like. File maintenance and disposition manual. We created one. It's mandated by the department that we create a file maintenance and disposition manual. And what it is it's a filing structure. This question says, why are old programs in your file maintenance and disposition manual? Some programs become obsolete, but that doesn't mean the records go away. We still may be maintaining records that are at the Federal Records Center, or that hasn't been transferred, permanent record that hasn't been transferred over to NARA's custody. For the new file code numbers, we were mandated by the department to use, we were using old 3-digit file code numbers, but now we use a 4-digit letter with the file code number, a new file code number. What is a disposition authority and why is it important? A disposition authority is a unique identifier assigned by NARA to a category of records that indicate the disposition which has been approved by NARA. So if we send a new schedule in, once it's approved, they'll assign a disposition authority to that record schedule. Can we destroy records that state they're unscheduled? The answer is no. Just want to show you what you would see in a file maintenance and disposition manual. And it allows for a complete filing system to include a 4-digit file code number, a description of a record, the retention of records, and the disposition authority. It shows you the file code number, APPL. It shows you the title, appeal case file. It gives you a description of what those appeal case files are. It includes correspondence, background material, request for a review, et cetera, et cetera. And it gives you the retention, temporary cutoff files at the end of the year in which case is closed. At the end, when we talked about the disposition authority, that's what that is. The National Archives approved that disposition authority when we send a new schedule in and it's approved. This at the bottom, it has to do with one of our desk reference guides and how we use that desk reference guide. And it provided file codes and policy, which we separated the file codes and made the file maintenance disposition manual a filing structure. And the actual, we created a different handbook for just the policy. So it was the desk reference guide was a combination of the two. This is just a copy of an SF-115, a standard form 115 of what, when we are creating a records schedule. This is just a little bit of information that I wanted to show you that we put in ERA to have those records approved. And once NAR gets this, and it's all done electronically, once NAR gets it, you know, they'll review it. If there's any questionable items, they'll send it back to us and tell us that, you know, maybe the retention period's too long, maybe it's not long enough. So this is just a series of all the information that we enter in the ERA to have our schedules approved based on our program. And what you see is that the schedules that we were writing were for tobacco programs. And, you know, under the disposition authority number, it gives you a description of all the information that relates. And also the final disposition, it tells you it's temporary. Is it media neutral? Yes. It covers a whole series of information. At the bottom here, it gives you cutoff instructions for the items that's being scheduled. Okay, this concludes today's session of Module 1 through 5, and we will resume tomorrow morning, and we will go over Modules 6, 7, and 8, which is identifying different types of records. We'll talk a little bit about electronic software, which is ARCIS, the Agency Record Center Information System. And I didn't put any slides in here on the ERA because that's sort of specific to what we do regarding records management. I will go over and talk a little bit about that. I will talk a bit about archiving and preparing the SF-135 to be put into the ARCIS system. And we will also have a question-answer session tomorrow morning. Is there any other questions?
Yes, we do have some questions. The first one, can a retiree get their records after retirement?
Not from us. They have to go to the, they have to go through maybe OPM if it's personnel information. But other than that, they don't own any other records other than their personnel stuff. Some of the things they received throughout the years, their SF-50 information, TSP information, that's non-record information. But anything that relates to them from a personnel standpoint, it doesn't come through the agency. They would have to go through Office of Personnel Management to do that.
Thank you. And I want to note that we have several questions related to records as it relates to an organization's website, social media. They're very detailed questions, and I think they're relevant to everybody. But if that questioner would not mind, I'd like to send those over to Keith so that he can research those questions and perhaps provide an answer tomorrow morning. So just want to let that person know we did receive your questions regarding social media, the agency website, but I'd like to go ahead and forward those to Keith so that he can research them and give us an answer tomorrow. Is that okay with you also, Keith?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. We do have some more questions. Can contractors be federal record custodians if that activity is not in their contract? Is that a standard FAR requirement?
Yes, they can, because they use and they have access to computers and information on that computer. So yes, they can. And they are custodians, really.
Is there a different process or requirement for maintaining and disposing of electronic files?
When disposing of electronic files, there's requirements for disk. You have to meet those shred requirements. You have to use certain kind of shredders. You have to use certain kind of equipments for hard drives. You can't just take that information, that type of stuff and just throw it in a bin. So there are requirements for it. There's some, there's different kind of shredders that we use for destroying, disk and CDs and things of that nature.
Thank you. And I think this is a comment and it's probably related to the retirement question. So maybe you can piggyback on this. In terms of a retiree requesting their records, would that not be through a FOIA request?
Well, again, that's up to OPM. I don't think that's a FOIA request to request your records. I think it's something that has to be worked out through Office of Personnel Management, because they have pretty much oversight of, retirement records and things of that nature. So it's something that you probably have to take up with them, because if you submit a FOIA request through us, we don't always have all, because those records are eventually transferred over. And anything that's personnel related, it's going to come through, from the time a person retires. We don't maintain those records. And the record copies that supervisors maintain of an employee folder, that's a lot of information is temporary in nature. There's some, and again, like you said, it could be 30 years old, but some information, it may not be allowed. But I think from an employee standpoint, when they retire, anything that's maintained, it has to come through their EOPF, Office of Personnel Management, someone like that. Can't go back to the agency and get that. They're no longer in our system, but they're in OPM system.
We have some more questions coming through, but I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, and we have a few housekeeping items to wrap up here near the end. I will make sure that Keith has these questions that we're getting into our portal so that we can try to cover those tomorrow morning. And just to remind everybody, we are recording this, and I've had some more questions about the slides. The recording and the slides, when they are available, and depending on where we're going to host them, we will be sending you a follow-up email, the email that you used to register, to let you know where you can find the slides as well as the recording. I want to thank our presenter, Keith. I think we've had some great information, great interaction. I want to thank you, the audience, for being attentive. I apologize for any kind of technical difficulties you may have experienced. For those of you, if you have any technical difficulties tomorrow, if you're using Explorer, we have found that Chrome or Firefox may be a better alternative if you're having trouble getting into our webinar. But alternatively, if you have any issues, please go ahead and send an email to the Center for Animal Welfare at aphis.usda.gov. That email's also in your registration link. We do hope that you will join us tomorrow at the same time for day 2. And if you are unable to join us, I want to thank you for your time today. After Wednesday, sometime on Thursday, please look for an evaluation link. That link will come from either GoToWebinar via Animal Care or directly from Animal Care. And just to confirm, that is an actual program within USDA, and that's the program that I work with. So please look after Thursday for an evaluation link. We really look forward to your input. This is first, hopefully, of a series of presentations we're going to be able to provide to the Greater Kansas City Federal Executive Board across multiple agencies. So we're really looking for your input. We want to know how we did here, how we can improve, and perhaps some additional topics you'd be interested in us providing. And again, I want to thank our presenter, Keith Holden, and the Greater Kansas City Federal Executive Board. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.